Moi, for over 3 years I've been waiting and dreaming to see again my volcanic lands, my home. Everything that I did, everything that I could save, was to prepare my return to my loved brothers and sisters. I personally don't have a residence, an address. I don't have a bank account. That's why my PayPal is not under my name. I don't have any social network. In fact, I don't have anything. It is at least 20 years that all of my possessions fit in an old backpack, because life gave me everything that I need. I have a family waiting for me in every corner of this world that will give me shelter and the courage needed to move on to the next question. With the melancholic feelings of lost lands, I have decided instead to invest everything that I had in an expedition for all of us, for all of you, my family. I personally think that it is time to take back our true history. Therefore, in this video we have to work together to try to make fit the muddy pieces of this puzzle called reality. I will be your eyes, and I will share with you what I have seen in this journey. Then you will be the mind, and you will tell me which piece is from this reality and which one can be left behind. Having an enormous problem to finish this endless documentary, I have decided to divide it in few parts. Otherwise, it would take me at least another month to end the ever-expanding third part. I take the occasion to highlight the fact that, at least for me, the making of videos is an extremely hard task, physically and mentally truly devastating. I thank all of the researcher and movie maker to take the time needed in creating and sharing such amazing and epic production and knowledge. You are awesome. But let's start learning what we will be researching in this new episode titled Liquid Europe and why. It is with enormous honor that I present you the studies of largely one of the brilliant minds that I respect the most in absolute, which is as well the person that brought this knowledge to my attention first. From the moment of the publication of his video, hundreds of researchers start using the word liquefaction in relation to the event we call the mud flood. Let me proudly present you Conspiracy Arras.
Hello everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about soil liquefaction and how I think it all ties into the phenomena we call the mud flood. Just looking at an official definition here, soil liquefaction, it occurs when a saturated or partially saturated soil by water substantially loses strength and stiffness in response to an applied stress like an earthquake or an explosion. And the material that is ordinarily a solid, it behaves like a liquid. Okay, so well, let's see if we can learn about these seismic waves. So really, it's this seismic wave that is generated by earthquakes and explosions that vibrates the soil or sediment, and that's the cause of the liquefaction. So let's take a look here, and I believe it was in Canterbury, New Zealand, 2010 and 11 that they had a series of earthquakes. And just reading the highlighted portion here, during the Canterbury earthquakes of 2010 and 11, liquefaction caused silt and fine sand. So liquefaction causes silt and fine sand to boil up and bury streets and gardens. So that's one effect, and it causes buildings and vehicles to sink. So it has this quicksand effect, and it also has the effect of bringing up soil and sediment from below ground level and depositing it. So those are two separate things that occur. And they're just saying here that liquefaction, it's usually associated with earthquakes of a magnitude of 6 or higher. I just wanted to point out here that let's see, liquefaction only happens when underlying waterlogged silts are present and when shaking is severe during an earthquake. Okay, yeah, so during 2010 and 2011 Canterbury earthquakes, over 400,000 tons of silt came to the surface, covering streets and gardens in several suburbs. So severe shaking in an earthquake, it puts pressure on the silt and water particles in these waterlogged layers, turning once firm sediment into a liquid. And then the pressure is increased by the ground above it, pushing down. Water fountains and sand boils can burst upward through any cracks. I just found this person's a Twitter account. They took a picture. They're on a tour with this person from the United States Geological Service, and they're in San Francisco, and he's pointing out liquefaction features in San Francisco. So an official employee of the United States Geological Service, and in the next photo, so they're on their little tour, and he's pointing out, yeah, this is caused by liquefaction. This door that is probably wasn't even a door originally, but you know, you could see. I mean, I can't even imagine the steps that go down here, but they're on a tour and they're just pointing out liquefaction features. So the phenomena of, we always see buildings below ground level, right? And typically like 3/4 of the first floor is buried beneath ground level. Now he's admitting it on this tour that, yeah, this is the cause of a lot of these buildings. The one in Japan I just showed you, here's another one. And I think what I'd like to do now is just show you some pictures of vehicles. And let's take a look at the Christchurch event. Again, all this was brought above the surface, all this sand and silt. This poor guy's got to dig his vehicle out. This is just the quicksand effect of the roads. You have all these vehicles, it's just turning into a swampy mess. And you got your bus. Look at this guy. Oh man, look at these two people. But here it's turned into quicksand basically. I mean, look at this. Unreal. Yeah, so you know, we always mention, why are the streets so muddy, right? When you look at older cities, and you'll notice that the streets are always in horrible condition. But this is Japan, and you could see all this, with all this soil that's being deposited, whether it's silt or sand. Got another picture. This was in Japan as well, and you could see, I mean, we've seen this in all the old major cities where you have this horrible, the streets are in horrible condition. And I think this goes some of the ways, this explains it in some way. And I just wanted to show you an old picture in Vicksburg, United States, 1909. And you've got these streets that are in horrible condition, full of silt or sand, and I believe, you know, where we experience an event like this liquefaction that potentially caused this. And I guess the last point I wanted to touch on is a channel called Tiger Doug. He alerted me to a Bible verse talking about mountains melting, split apart like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. So mountains melting like wax pouring down a hill. So you have this interesting, it talks about the hills and mountains melting like wax. And there's an interesting video I saw, and I'd just like to play it because I think it's an example of liquefaction that kind of ties into this a little bit. So here it is. This isn't a mudslide or a landslide. All these, this is just turning. It's all turning into, this is all becoming liquefied. Just melting like wax, basically.
Di drammatico. Madonna! È pazzesco! Incredibile!
I don't know if this is in France. That sounded like French, but, or it's in Italy. I think it was supposed to be in Italy, but not sure. But yeah, you could see just a liquefied river of earth.
Madonna Santissima!
I mean, it just keeps going.
Fuori di qui! Ma siete dei pazzi! Madonna Santissima!
All the trees, just everything's kind of just melting, eh? So to summarize, you have liquefaction that you can argue that it's responsible for all the buildings that we see that are below ground level, the leaning buildings, the roads that are just full of mud, and also deposits of sand and silt around buildings as well could be brought from below surface and engulf buildings. So I think this liquefaction ties in nicely to the mud flood. And these seismic waves, it's not just earthquakes that they're associated with. They're also associated with explosions. I think that liquefaction can explain the targeted, localized aspect to the mud flood because it's only in certain areas, seemingly. So I think they can be directed, they can be triggered, basically, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, sir, for yet another very brilliant and elegant presentation. So do you remember my question? Where did all of that mud come from? Well, under the full video of Conspiracy Us, titled Liquefaction and the Mud Flood, the link is in the description, a magnificent researcher whose channel goes under the name Quantum of Conscience wrote in his comment, "You likely solved it. There was a big event 2 centuries ago that involved liquefaction. Like most of our history, it's cover-ups and lies. Add this to a long list of what we don't know about our history." I personally think that this person is sharing very beautiful thoughts and messages in his videos, and I totally agree with him that obviously some enormous event took place in the first half of the 1800s, and somehow our brilliant and advanced so-called historians and chronologists didn't notice it, and they are still insisting that it was common dimensional malfunction in the construction skills of our ancestors in building their own towns if we have poor quality red bricks building buried by meter of mud rotting all over the world. Sir Philippe Druskinin and others are some 4 years presenting undeniable proof of the mud flood event in very well documented videos. By the way, on the screen you have some of the thousands of examples of liquefaction or mud flood, you name it, that took place at some point during the beginning of the 19th century. I would like to add just one small speculative observation regarding the century so-called the 19th. To me it was wider than what we have been told. But let's start with our homework. In this first part of the video, we will examine a very strange ground liquefaction, which I cannot straightforward relate to the mud flood event of the 19th century, but that somehow fits in this theory of melting soil or ground with frequencies and vibration. I'm not going to say that that's the cause of the mud flood, or the reason behind those enormous amount of earth or clay in Finland, but I will show you what lies in the areas where the mud, without any doubt, have its origins. On the screen at this moment, we can appreciate the pretty and elegant town of Porvoo, located in the south of the country of Finland. It is considered one of the oldest cities of the country, belonging to the so-called and so-faked Middle Ages, or let's say the 14th century, even if it wasn't officially declared a city in the beginning of the 1600s. What proof do we have of all of these centuries of history? None, because the town magically burned down to ashes twice in the 16th century. We have to blame the Vikings and the Russians for that. Then the bad Russian burned it down again in the beginning of 1700. That must be real. And finally in 1760, when 2/3 of the city burned to the ground due to a boiling fish. I'm not joking. This is what is telling us our old Liarpedia. You can't make this stuff up, huh? I wonder how many descendants of Genghis Khan we have in town. But why I'm presenting you this particular city is because it had obviously experienced, as many other thousand, the liquefaction event that took place in the first half of the 19th century. But what makes it one of the key places to understand the liquefaction is because you can actually follow it. The old town has developed on the steepness of a series of hills. So let's have a look at the lowest level of the city. As I already have mentioned in one of my previous videos, a few years ago, in the center of the town, or the lowest area of the town, workers had uncovered an old wood road, buried, as we can observe, by many meters of mud or clay. There is no doubt that the road is maximum few hundred or less years old, observing the rotting process of the wood, which is still in an early state. So where is all of that mud coming from? But it looks like that burying themselves is a common practice between old roads. These ones are located in Italy, on the Lago Maggiore, precisely in the town of Arona. We will talk a lot about that area in the endless third part of this video. This one was dug out in Quebec. The images are courtesy of Ziggy Dan. And this other one in Russia. Those images come from the New Earth channel and megaliths.org. By the way, Madame Sylvie is many years exposing the liquefaction event as well. I can strongly recommend to follow their studies. There's a link in the description to their remarkable investigation. But let's go back to Porvoo. This one is the town city hall, and as we can observe, it has huge issues with the ground level. That entrance in winter is covered by many meters of snow. On the screen at this moment we can appreciate some old buildings of Helsinki, capital of the country. If someone thinks that the architect who designed them chose to build them in such matters, is a weirdo. Is not. Something obviously has happened to them. But we were talking about the Porvoo City Hall. This building in particular is one of the, let's call them, historically fake structures. Supposedly completed in 1893, so the magical camera long exposure tricks were already losing fashion, we will find obviously dozens of pictures of its proud construction, countless of the construction material getting to town by barges, and hundreds of its inauguration, which I guess consisted of crowd of visitors from all over the country, politicians, the so-called elite. On the screen you have the main cathedral of Helsinki, which share with the Porvoo City Hall, I guess, enormous ceremonies of inauguration. So let's have a look at Porvoo in those years of awakening and its sparkling construction daily life. Before moving forward with our investigation, I will add one more proof that those 19th century images were indeed staged. Actually, will be my favorite researcher and one of the person that I respect the most to close once and for all this camera exposure or delay in capturing images issue that magically during the 1840s, 50s and 60s made vanish some crowds and let be captured just specific individuals that most probably were frozen while walking. Humans vanishing from the pictures, supposedly because of their movements, but horses and other animals are totally fine and capturable. Let me proudly present you Sir Philippe Druzhinin.
Hey guys, was checking out some pictures today, and actually was thinking about this missing people stuff. So I'm just trying to check the pictures of 1850s, 1860s, and try to understand what's wrong with them. So if we see like a staged picture, then something's supposed to be wrong. Like those people are raising and going down on this ladder, Potemkinskaya ladder, very, 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 very big one. And look at them, they are not, they are not taking shadows like we used to have in the pictures with people that are walking around and are not in the focus due to the long time exposure. But right now we have like people are totally standing or not moving, or they moving and don't care about the exposure rate, right? So this is kind of weird. So if it's staged, let's say if it's staged, let's check this theory. Could this be staged? And here we have horses, we have cabs, and nobody's moving, so long exposure doesn't matter. Horses can't stand still for so long. Again, here we have the same picture. Horses are standing still. No problem with exposure. This is definitely staged because she's like turning around, and usually this guy is smiling. Look, they don't have anything on their feet. No shoes. Also, how can you stage the buffaloes? So long exposure doesn't matter, right? Or does? 1852, 1860s by Roger Fenton. I always wanted to review them. Like here, they are totally standing still, nothing happens. So it's 1852. So this is definitely staged. Some picture, some artwork by this photograph. He wanted to make it pretty, right? So those kid and this woman are standing still. This is his order picture. He also was picturing Russian Empire. Made a couple shots, and as always, no person is visual on these pictures, although they seem to be a very populated city at that time, but not a single person or a shadow that looking like a person right here. We can only guess where all those people's at. Like so many wood here, but not a single person. Either everybody is praying somewhere in church, or who knows. But this is not actually what we are looking right now. We're looking for staged. Again, two persons here. It's 54, 1950, or 1854 at least. 1854, that was wrong. 1854. It's Abbey in Fountains. probably England. Those people standing still. So are they staging this? Probably staging if we believe the long exposure. Again, here. Are they staging? This guy's supposed to be like going. Look at his leg. It's moving. And he like froze for 30 seconds. I don't know. Again, this girl is trying to hop off the fence. Look at her feet and her arms. So is this staging for 30 seconds?
I personally think that I don't have to add any comment, and I will not touch again this topic of the so-called vacant series, or the strange behavior of the camera exposure / the stage origins of those pictures during the middle of the 19th century, because after going through literally thousands of them, I could clearly prove myself that something is deeply wrong with those images and the official narrative presented to us by the so-called historians and chronologists. In the description you have the links to the awesome videos made by Sir Philippe. I encourage the viewers to have a look at them. But let's go back to our building. Obviously its date of construction is open to debate, and in this old picture of the structure we can observe that one side of it has sank due to, can it be liquefaction? And in recent years the building had to be lifted few meters on its right side, but kept his issues with the ground level that surrounded it. But let's start following the origin of the mud. So, in the lowest area the town is covered by many meters of earth or clay. What about this building? It is mostly made of our famous red bricks, as this other one, which is located nearby. Therefore, those structures obviously do not belong to any Middle Ages, but rather around the beginning of the 1800s. We will talk a lot in the third part of this video about this fake red bricks world that we are living in. But what is very obvious is that one side of it is mud flooded or buried by a large amount of mud or earth. If we turn around it, it clearly shows us that it has gone through various structural modifications and that indeed the building was built without the mud covering its front right side. On the screen you can see the back of it, and here the cover front side. But let's move up the hill and follow that line of earth or clay. This is an extremely interesting building, made of, guess, red bricks. It stands out because of the very evident and visible effect of the liquefaction. As we can observe, some 6 to 8 meters of earth has been dug out on this side. You can clearly see on the right side of the image the ground levels. Windows sticking out a bit everywhere, and an obvious appearance of a structure that has seen a lot of mud coming down from the hill behind. This is an old house just across the street. So where is all of that mud coming from? If we just move higher up to the hill, we stumble upon the Porvoo Cathedral. What a coincidence! Just happened to be located in the proximity of where the mud looks like had its origins. But we will come back to the so-called Porvoo Church on the way down. For the moment, let's get to the highest point of the town. Few meters above the cathedral, in fact, we can study the composition of the so-called bedrock, which revealed its appearance because it's without mud. Here we can see some images of places where the earth, or clay, start to form on its way down to town, growing in thickness as we move down toward the lowest area, where, as we have seen, the mud, or earth, or clay, has a thickness of many meters. So let's have a look at the top of the hill where the mud came from. Everything looks melted, liquefied. On these various images that I personally took, you can contemplate that the stone, the bedrock, at some point has completely changed its composition into a liquid form. There is no doubt about it. In this image, we can clearly see that in front of that house, the ground, the bedrock, became liquid or had experienced a liquefaction event. But the town of Porvoo has many higher points on other parts of the city. This is in front of the city library. Same exact situation. The top of the hill looks melted or liquefied and presents no sign of so-called cultural layers. Interesting that if you research this place, instead of showing you or mentioning this otherworldly phenomenon, They tell you about the Japanese garden that they made on top of it. No mention or explanation about what could have caused or how the entire hill at some point have melted, without even mentioning the meter of mud or clay they have generated while basically becoming liquid. Obviously, if and just if that accumulation of earth or mud was created by the bedrock liquefaction that we are researching. But let's move to another hilltop of the town. This is Gammelbacka, an area packed with ancient sites. And again, we can contemplate the total lack of so-called cultural layers. The bedrock liquefaction is very evident. But on this spot, we can observe a very interesting aspect of the melted ground that I have managed to record for you. In this short video, we can appreciate that the first layer of stone is extremely easy to break, like peeling away its crust. So let's listen to the sound of that top layer of so-called rock. As you just heard, the let's call it crust is coming out without any resistance. It is still barely attached to the bedrock. So how come the liquefaction took place hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago is still there? What about the little ice age, the giant ice age, the middle ice age? You know what I'm talking about. Those enormous ice blocks scratching the ground, forming and melting over and over again for millions of years. I'm confused. They are telling us that the ice was responsible for the total destruction of the Finnish land, throwing boulders everywhere and demolishing mountains and hills, but didn't peel off that few millimeters of top layers. Before trying to date this liquefaction event, let me give you another example of an obvious case of bedrock melting into a liquid form that we can find throughout the country of Finland. In one of my previous videos, I presented you the hidden Kirnut, or giants' kettles. Giants, what a joke! Despite their dementia official origin, these cute guys are scattered around all over the place. While researching them, I was pointing out the fact that, as we can clearly observe in these images, they look completely melted. The bedrock around them has melted. It is very evident. The side of the interior of them looks melted. The bottom looks liquefied at some point. The rounded edges of some of them look like they have turned into plasticine. And all of this mess, geologists blame it on a rolling stone. I'm not joking. These are the scratches of a stone spear spinning inside the Kirnut, supposedly for millions or hundreds of thousands of years, and creating a larger and larger hole. Give me a break. But what the giant kettle can tell us is that observing the erosion on the edges, we can clearly see that they are still very sharp, obviously leading us away from the millions of years erosion effect proposed by geologists. So let's try to understand when this bedrock liquefaction event took place. Let's first listen what the Quackademic, thank you Madame Sylvie for that specific title, would tell us.
33 millions of years ago, during the 66th Zoico era, our spinning ball Earth was devastated by volcanoes and lava, asteroids, meteorites. The surface was boiling, melting, blah 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 blah.
But excuse me, sir, look that there are signs of a rope or a cord or something printed in the bedrock while it was still in an almost liquid state.
What?
Yes, some kind of a rope got printed in the stone while it was still malleable.
But that's not a rope. That's the print of a 666 Ratopos rolling dead down the melting hill 33 millions of years ago.
Fine, but to me still looks like the sign of a rope, or chain, or some thick cord, like, for example, this one, shown in this decoration. As we can observe on this image, which is showing us the bedrock liquefaction right next to the print or whatever tool mark, the first layer of the stone, again, is very easy to break, like taking off its crust, giving us more evidence that we are not dealing with any millions of years old stone erosion, but rather very recent. But unfortunately, that cannot be the case, otherwise their house of fake cards would crumble and their 33 millions of years ago, oh shut up, can't fit any longer in a real scenario. But I have just one small question to add. Why, if the liquefaction of the hill took place millions of years ago, it is totally exposed to the elements? I mean, where are the so-called cultural layers of accumulation of dust, dirt, or earth? Those few millimeters per year that should be covering it after those hundreds of thousands of years? I'm confused. It is normal to find meters and meters of earth or mud covering entire first floor of couple of hundred years old building, and no sign of this accumulation in millions of years old bedrock. And what about this dude? Supposedly he's there standing in the forest since our iconic fairy tale, the Ice Age, and the ground didn't rise at all. How do you explain that? But my point about the dating of the liquefaction event are not over. Let's move to another hill of the town, which is actually the highest area of the city. Called Kevatkumpu, stands a couple of hundred meters from the sea level, and again we can see the hilltop completely exposed. No cultural layers whatsoever. And again the sign of bedrock liquefaction are very visible. In the video that I've dedicated to the amazing Bock saga and its awesome people, titled Endless Sagas in Quarrylands, I was pointing out that it is at least incredible that such historically low populated land as Finland has gigantic quarries scattered around all over the country. I mean, it's insane. Without even mentioning the millions of tool marks that you can find on most of the boulders that your eyes can spot. But the main point is that we can all agree that those quarries and tool marks are obviously not thousands or millions of years old, but rather few hundreds. Well, this conclusion can help us a lot dating the Porvo bedrock liquefaction, because, as we can contemplate, the hilltop is one of those quarries. If we move to the proximity of the blocks that have been separated from the bedrock, we can observe many tool marks, obviously showing us the technique used to quarry the land. There is no doubt that those are tool marks. So let's examine the bedrock liquefaction. As you can clearly see, the boulder that has been manually and not naturally separated does not present any sign of being affected by the liquefaction. None. But the bedrock from which it has been separated look melted. The flow of the liquid material goes between the two stones. No doubt about it. It clearly means that the boulder has been cut before the liquefaction took place. Everybody agrees on this one. Here you can see that the upper part, the bedrock, has melted, and on the lower part, the separated block with the tool marks, without sign of that liquefaction. Conclusion. You can put your 33 million years ago back to your fancy dinosaurs encyclopedia, and the liquefaction of Porvo bedrock took place in the last few hundred years. Period. Now, after researching deeply that particular liquefied or melted quarry, I got to one personal conclusion. To me, and many other researchers that I brought to the spot, the boulders that have been manually separated simply didn't react to whatever frequency or vibration had liquefied the bedrock due to its separation from it. But let's continue. Next question. How does something like rock liquefaction even happen? Imagine the temperature. On the screen at this moment, you can read a comment posted by a brilliant subscriber. Sir Mike Hingle is clearly talking about melting metals and metalloid without heat by manipulating molecular bonding energies with governed resonant pulse of strong magnetic field. We can control phase transition in state of matter. Please pause and read the full comment. The links are in the description. Sir Mike is not the only expert that I've heard talking about melting metalloids without any sort of heat. One of the researchers that I respect the most is actually one of my best friends. I could call him an amazing brother. Sir Dave Nicho has personally liquefied a block of magnetite, a rock mineral and one of the main iron ores, which is very well known for its magnetic properties. Well, I found very interesting to discover that when liquefied, the iron mineral loses completely its magnetic force. To melt stones, the frequencies are very well known throughout the internet, as well as the frequency needed to do so without any sort of heat. The problem, for what I understood, is not the knowledge, but the cost of building the device to direct those frequencies to a localized spot. We have to keep in mind that we are very simple people, with less than zero economical resources to invest in such staggering experiments. But he is ready to do it and share the result for the world to see and use. Obviously, liquefying the bedrock below a city can turn out to be one of the most effective sound weapons in the world. All of this bedrock liquefaction could also explain those so-called out-of-place artifacts that were found in stones all over the world. By the way, this coin, with clear date 1820, was dug out from many meter or hour mud or clay in Russia, obviously leading us to the conclusion that whatever mud flood event took place in those areas was after that date. So, let's go back to Porvo just to add a few more observations. If we move back down to the melted hill, we start to encounter our muddy accumulation, growing in thickness following the steepness of the terrain. Right under the origin of the earth, or mud, or clay, we have this church. Supposedly built in the 15th century and completed in 1418, but coincidentally sharing same erosion and motif with plenty of well-known more recent churches throughout the Baltic countries and Finland, our cathedral is presenting us in its interior a beautiful black unicorn. Isn't it cute? Beside of it the holy boat of Popeye, and let's not forget our red brick column. Apart from those obviously desired by God items, the church is presenting us an organ. A subscriber named Javier Contreras sent me these images of old, pre-mud flooded organs. I have a strong feeling that there's much more to those artifacts than what we are led to believe, and that they are a big part of the story. But we will talk a lot about fake decoration and interior of churches in the third part of this episode. But what I would like to point out is the fact that the so-called bell tower is separated from the church by many meters, making me wonder which kind of punishment those poor devoted had to go through and why, having to walk up and down for any maintenance of the bell tower in a supposedly freezing winter without heating system, electricity, and etc. Why they didn't put it next to the main building, with an internal passage? What a weirdos! Or maybe that's not just a bell tower, and its real purpose is hidden from us. Ah, and no, I don't think that with those small bells you could trigger any liquefaction. But what about one of this size? Giants. What a joke. By the way, some old Finnish myths say that giants didn't like at all the sound of church bells, and they moved to live underground. Back to the church. As we can clearly see, it is completely mud-flooded. The entrance to the bell tower gets to my shoulder, and the entire backyard, that is enclosed in walls, is packed of mud or earth. Moving down the hill, we can find a good example of what I would speculate was the first and easy solution to get rid out of the mud. Stone paving, or flooring. People would line stone on top of it to form a path or a road. On the screen you have some example of roads clearly post-liquefaction event, or mud-flooded, under process of cleanup, like for example this one of Tartu, located in the country of Estonia, courtesy of a subscriber named Eldorado. I consider it a perfect evidence of the cleanup process of the city street after the liquefaction event that massively affected the three Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. This other awesome 1880s picture of Helsinki is clearly showing us that the center of the city has been affected and dug out as well from meters of mud. Just look at the condition of the wall of the most important cathedral of a city that just became capital of a country. So, last observation about the Porvo bedrock liquefaction enigma before moving south. This is the other side of the river. Just a few dozen of meters away and stones everywhere. Huge boulders and massive blocks are scattered around all over the place, but no sign of any liquefaction. On the screen we can contemplate a beginning of 1900 map of the town, showing us that in its original design the city was composed of regular straight or squared road blocks, and the area that is painted chaotically out of order is the melted or liquefied one. Another proof is this pre-mud flood illustration of Porvo, dating 1789, and at the bottom of it a 1900 picture of the same area. Just look at the height of the church walls compared to the ground, or the mud. No comments. Well, I think that I bored you enough with melted stones. Therefore, while following and adding some observation of the mud flood or the liquefaction event, we will move away from Finland direction the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. On the screen you can appreciate some images of sand mines located all around the area of the south of the country of Finland, near the town of Porvoo, Isnas, Askola and Pukkila. The thickness of the earth, which is visibly without rocks and clearly composed of some kind of clay or mud, can reach up to dozens of meters, obviously showing us the scale or the magnitude of the liquefaction event or events. But what is very enigmatic is the quantity of boulders and stones that are scattered around on top of it. Which kind of cataclysmic event brought all of these boulders to this land? The entire areas of Finland, Karelia, Lapland, the Kola Peninsula of Russia are covered by rivers of stones of every kind. So we have sign of bedrock liquefaction, buildings that have sank due to whatever sand boiling event or events, an enormous river of stones on top of it. Finland is indeed a geological amusement park with a totally freak landscape. But if we just cross the Gulf of Finland and we start moving inland into the Baltic countries, the scenario changes radically, at least in the surface. As we can clearly observe, below ground level the signs of the liquefaction are very visible, as everywhere else I could speculate worldwide. But on top of the layers of clay or mud, you will barely find a stone. In fact, Latvia and Lithuania are between the most mud-flooded lands I have ever seen. But let's start first to understand where we are located in the world and why we are here. On the screen at this moment, you can appreciate a Google Map image of the Latvian and Lithuanian lands in our days, and here a 16th century map of the same area. Apart from making me notice the obvious historical importance of those lands, it makes me wonder if my awesome brothers and sisters in those areas know that the largest empire of all, called Great Tartaria, used to be their neighbor. And if we move to this other map belonging to the same period, we can actually see that those lands had huge importance. Just look at the size of the cities depicted in Livonia, our days Latvia. Massive settlements, comparable to any important historical capital. There are many cities larger than Istanbul, or Aleppo, or Budapest. Interesting to say the least. Do you remember this 1600 map that I presented you in one of my previous videos? Finland is depicted more populated than the UK. Cool, without even mentioning that the name Tartaria appears everywhere on the map. But the number one questions are: what are those entrances or cavities in the mountains on the west side of the Caspian Sea? Why is there written Albania? And what are those lines depicted over the entire cartographical work? I don't know why, but they make me think of these lines that are scattered around all over the planet. What are they? What happened where they intersect with each other? But I imagine that everybody knows about them. Over 3 years ago, I published a video regarding those enormous grids. On the screen you can appreciate my 3 years old snapshot of some Canadian lands, precisely in the province of Alberta, covered by those lines. Well, 3 years later, I went back to have a look and wow, that's much worse than what I could remember. I wonder why in television they are bombarding people with dementia documentaries about monkeys magically evolving into humans, and no one documentary about these monster grids. What a joke. So, let's have a look at a few more of my 3 years old snapshot. This is Namibia, the desertic African country. What is this? And here Namibia in our days. I hope that no one is disputing the existence of those lines in the real world, whatever that could mean. But if someone is trying to convince himself that what you are seeing is some Google Maps mistake, some image defect, I will show these images. The first one was taken from an airplane in the north of the Canadian province of Quebec. Just look at the size of that missing forest. The next one was taken from an awesome sister somewhere in the desertic areas of the Arabic Peninsula. Incredible image. But the best proof came from Sir Melvin Callan. He kindly sent me these images from northern Alberta, Canada. I don't think that it is needed for me to add any comment. I will let you enjoy some images of those enormous grids that are found in videos of my two favorite researchers in YouTube. Please enjoy. Now, the official explanation about their existence, at least for the Canadian ones, is that those are seismic lines. On the screen you are observing a series of images of the extension of those obviously made in the last few decades, lines. And here they are showing us how they make them. What a joke! I'm not saying that they haven't made some scratches into the forest with those bulldozers, but these go way beyond that. Ha and no, they are not icebergs scratching the bedrock. Give me a break. The scale of the forest clearing, the extraction of all of the tree stumps. By the way, you cannot see them thrown on the side of the lines. What, they brought them home with them? How? It's unhuman. But experts are helping us to solve this enigma, giving us a very important information. Bulldozers are no longer used to build seismic lines. Instead, the lines are cut by hand. This switch over occurred in the 1990s. This is so dementia. So what about those in the desert? Bulldozer. Oh, sorry, cut by hand. How can they go straight on sand, hills, obstacle of every kind? It's Africa, dude. Plus, what's the reason to make them? These images are courtesy of the New Earth Channel. This is again somewhere in the middle south of the African continent. What is going on here? Then you find thousands of documentaries telling you about the last line discovered in Nazca. What a circus is this world. So what about those lines in Siberia? Bulldozer. Oh, sorry, cut by hand. Give me a complete break. But for the total delusion of their seismic minds, I will go back to Finland. These airborne laser scanning images of the Finnish forest are showing us that the lines are printed in the ground, and they are not some deforestation of the top layer of the soil. The situation with those enormous Canadian grid lines became so pathetic that even awesome children are asking what are they. No comments. But let's go back to the Baltic countries. Obviously, we have thousands of so-called bulldozer cut-by-hand seismic lines all over the area. I mean, it's insane. There are cut lines in the forest everywhere you go and everywhere you look. In my previous video, I was asking about these perfectly straight roads that are found all over Latvia. Are they built on top of those lines? Well, if that's the case, we cannot blame them on some mulcher or bulldozer. I'm sorry, I cannot say any more those words without peeing in my pants. Recent seismic line operation, because those roads are on maps since at least a century. So, being already on the path, talking about old maps, let's have a look at one of the most beautiful and wild coastline I have seen in Europe.